All right, listener. So it seems like you're on this quest for English fluency, huh?
Mm.
And you've been digging into the Master English Fluency podcast to get there. We've got all your notes here ready to go on a deep dive with you.
You know, it's really cool how they approach this whole idea of fluency. They're not just hung up on perfect grammar. It's more about, like, expressing yourself, confidently and naturally. They're like, yeah, forget sounding like a robot. Just speak your mind.
I love that. And they don't shy away from tackling some of those myths, those pesky myths that can trip up learners.
Yeah.
Like the idea that you have to think in your native language first and then translate into English.
Right. It's like you're trying to solve a math problem while juggling 5 things at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster, or at least a very stilted conversation.
Totally. The podcast hosts are really clear about that. They say translating just slows you down. It makes your speech sound well translated.
So it's all about rewiring your brain
Yeah.
to think directly in English.
Yeah, even if it feels a little awkward at first.
Like you're upgrading your brain's operating system.
Exactly. And speaking of speed, they also debunk the myth that talking fast equals fluency.
It's not a race, right?
Not.
It's about getting your message across clearly and effectively.
Exactly. They're all about clarity and smoothness.
They also address the belief that you need to live in an English-speaking country to become fluent.
Which is a huge relief for people who might not have that opportunity.
Right. They emphasize that immersion doesn't have to be geographical. It can be about surrounding yourself with English language resources.
Yeah.
Creating your own little English-speaking bubble right at home.
Like building your own English world.
Exactly. And that leads us to another myth they tackle, needing a massive vocabulary to be fluent.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in trying to memorize every word in the dictionary.
But they advocate for a more strategic approach, right?
Absolutely. They say focus on those high-frequency words and phrases, the ones you'll actually use in everyday conversations.
It's like having a core set of tools that you can use to build anything.
Exactly. And they have a whole segment on what they call daily power-ups. Think of it like leveling up your English skills with consistent practice.
Like a video game for language learning.
Exactly. One of the most interesting tips is this idea of thinking in English all day.
Sounds intense.
It is, but it's about making English a part of your daily life.
So even when you're not actively studying, you're still immersing yourself in the language.
Right, like constantly exposing your brain to English, even in those little moments throughout the day.
So instead of thinking I'm hungry, you'd think my stomach is growling.
Exactly. You're making English feel more natural, less like a foreign language that you have to translate.
I like that. What are some other power-up suggestions?
Well, they talk about this technique called shadowing, which is basically mimicking English audio as closely as possible.
Like becoming a vocal clone of your favorite English speaker.
Exactly. You're not just passively listening, but actively trying to replicate their pronunciation, intonation, rhythm, everything.
It sounds like a workout for your tongue.
It is. And they also recommend the classic self-recording technique.
Oh, I know. Listening to yourself speak can be a little cringy.
But it's so valuable for pinpointing areas where you might be stumbling or using incorrect grammar.
Like having a personal language coach in your pocket.
Exactly. You can identify those patterns and then focus on improving them.
And along those lines,
Yeah.
they're big fans of reading aloud.
Not just reading in your head, but actually vocalizing the words.
What's the benefit of that?
It helps you get comfortable with the sounds of English, improves your pronunciation, and builds confidence in speaking.
Like a dress rehearsal for real-life conversations.
Exactly. And speaking of conversations, they strongly emphasize regular conversation practice.
Makes sense. You can practice all you want in isolation, but putting those skills to use in real-world settings is where the magic happens.
It's where you take those fluency muscles you've been building and put them to the test.
So they recommend exploring online language exchange platforms, finding conversation groups, or even using language exchange apps.
Right. Even if you don't live in an English-speaking country, you can still find opportunities to chat with native speakers.
And get that real-time feedback.
Exactly. They also recommend something a little more introspective, keeping a daily journal in English.
So it's not just about practicing speaking, but also honing your writing skills.
Exactly. And they suggest that by organizing your thoughts and experiences in written English, you're essentially training your brain to express itself more clearly and coherently.
Which translates to smoother, more confident speaking.
Exactly. It's like a mental warm-up for those real-life conversations.
So you're prepping your brain for those spontaneous moments.
Exactly. It's like a mental warm-up for those real-life conversations.
Yeah.
You're prepping your brain for those spontaneous moments where you just have to speak. And besides those daily power-ups, The podcast also dives into some pretty clever vocabulary hacks.
Yeah, like secret codes to unlock fluency.
Exactly. One thing that stood out to me was their emphasis on learning phrases instead of just isolated words.
I've heard that advice before, but I never really understood why it's so important.
Well, think of it this way. When you learn a single word, you're just memorizing a definition.
Right, it's like a dictionary entry.
But when you learn a phrase, you're absorbing the natural rhythm and flow of the language.
It's like learning to dance by practicing entire routines instead of just individual steps.
Exactly. You're not just expanding your vocabulary, you're developing a feel for how words work together in authentic English.
So instead of just memorizing the word happy, you'd learn phrases like, I'm over the moon, or that made my day.
Exactly. You're not just learning words, you're learning how to use them naturally.
That's a game changer. And they also recommend keeping a vocabulary journal, but not just for jotting down new words.
There's a twist to it.
Oh, interesting. What do they suggest?
Instead of just writing down the definition, they encourage you to write the word in a complete sentence that actually demonstrates its meaning,
So it's like creating your own little mini dictionary.
with real-life examples.
Yeah. So if you learn the word exhausted, you wouldn't just write down the definition. You'd write something like, after that marathon meeting, I was completely exhausted,
Exactly. You're putting the word into action.
making it real.
Yeah.
And they also highlight the importance of practicing synonyms and antonyms.
Right. So instead of always relying on those same basic words, you're building a richer vocabulary.
It's like adding more colors to your linguistic palette.
Exactly. You can express yourself with more nuance and precision,
And they also recommend learning vocabulary by topic.
which makes a lot of sense.
Right. So if you're interested in travel, you'd focus on learning vocabulary related to booking flights, packing your bags, navigating a new city.
Exactly. You're making the vocabulary relevant to your interests and goals.
So it's more engaging. And of course, they emphasize the importance of regular review, using flashcards or apps like Quizlet.
Repetition is key.
It's like drilling those words into your long-term memory.
Exactly. So you can access them easily when you need them.
What about idioms? Do
Mhm.
they talk about those?
Oh yeah, they're big fans of idioms. They see them as a way to add that extra layer of naturalness and fluency to your speech.
But idioms can be so tricky.
They can be confusing, but that's part of the fun of learning a language.
Right, discovering those quirky expressions.
Exactly. It shows you're really starting to grasp the nuances of English.
But let's be real, fluency isn't just about memorizing words and practicing grammar rules. There are bound to be challenges along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Even native speakers stumble sometimes.
So what kind of challenges does Master English Fluency address? And what advice do they offer?
Well, they dedicate a whole segment to conquering those common hurdles.
Like a training montage for fluency.
Exactly. One of the biggest ones they discuss is hesitation.
That moment when your brain freezes and you can't get the words out.
Exactly. And they emphasize that overthinking grammar rules is often the culprit.
So instead of getting bogged down in the details, they encourage learners to prioritize communication.
Over perfection.
It's about getting your message across,
Yeah.
even if it's not grammatically perfect.
Exactly. And they offer some practical tips for dealing with those tip-of-the-tongue moments.
You just can't remember the right word.
Exactly. They suggest either using simpler words to convey your meaning or trying to describe the word you're looking for.
So if you can't remember the word microwave, you could say the thing that heats up food quickly
Exactly. It keeps the conversation flowing,
and prevents those awkward silences. And they also tackle the issue of nervousness.
which is a common hurdle for many English learners, especially when speaking in front of others.
I can relate to that. My heart used to race whenever I had to speak English in public.
They offer some helpful tips for managing those nerves, like practicing in front of a mirror, recording yourself speaking, and starting with topics you're comfortable with.
It's all about easing yourself into those speaking situations and finding what works for you.
Exactly. And they wrap up this segment with a really important message about embracing mistakes.
Mistakes are inevitable.
They are. And they shouldn't hold us back.
They're opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. And to illustrate this point, they dedicate a segment to role-playing.
Where they actually demonstrate how to have more fluent and engaging conversations.
Exactly. It's like they're giving listeners a front row seat to real-life English conversations.
And showing them how to navigate those tricky moments.
Exactly. In one scenario, they play out a simple conversation starter, like, what do you usually do on weekends?
The classic.
But instead of just giving a basic answer, they break down how to make the response more engaging and demonstrate fluency.
So instead of just saying, I usually stay at home and relax. You could say something like, on weekends, I love to explore new hiking trails or curl up with a good book and a cup of tea.
Exactly. You're adding details and personal example.
It brings your response to life.
And they do this with a variety of scenarios, covering topics like ordering food, giving directions, and even expressing opinions.
It's like they're providing a toolbox of conversational strategies.
Exactly. And they wrap up the podcast with a really important message about motivation.
Because, let's face it, the journey to fluency can be a long one.
It can be. And it's easy to get discouraged.
So what kind of motivational nuggets do they offer?
Well, they remind listeners that fluency isn't a destination. It's a journey.
There's no finish line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's important to celebrate the progress you make along the way.
And enjoy the process.
Exactly. And they encourage listeners to focus on expressing themselves clearly and confidently.
Even if they make a few mistakes along the way.
It's about embracing those imperfections.
And seeing them as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And they also touch on a really interesting point about the impact of fluency on your native language.
Oh, yeah. They ask listeners to consider how mastering English might actually change how they think in their native language.
It's a thought-provoking question.
It makes you wonder if learning another language rewires your brain.
In a way that enhances your overall cognitive abilities.
I'd love to explore that idea further.
Me too. It's fascinating to think about how expanding our linguistic repertoire might actually reshape the way we perceive and interact with the world around us.
And that brings us to some of the additional research we've uncovered on the cognitive benefits of bilingualism.
Oh, right. This is where we go beyond the podcast.
And delve into the science behind language learning. What have you found?
Well, studies have shown that bilingual individuals tend to have better cognitive flexibility,
Yeah.
enhanced problem-solving skills, and even improved memory compared to their monolingual counterparts.
So learning another language isn't just about expanding your vocabulary
It's about giving your brain a workout.
and boosting its overall performance.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is the research on how bilingualism can protect against cognitive decline as we age.
Like a shield for your brain.
It seems that juggling two languages creates a kind of cognitive reserve,
That helps keep the brain sharp and resilient.
even as we get older.
So learning another language could potentially delay the onset of conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia.
It's incredible.
It's like giving your brain an extra layer of protection.
And it underscores the profound impact that language learning can have on our long-term cognitive health and well-being. But let's not forget about the social and cultural benefits of fluency.
Right. The Master English Fluency podcast also features a segment where they share inspiring stories from English learners around the world.
They do. They've interviewed people from all walks of life who have used English to advance their careers, connect with loved ones from different cultures, travel the world, and even pursue their artistic passions.
It's a reminder that English is more than just a language. It's a tool that can unlock incredible opportunities.
And enrich our lives in countless ways.
And I love that they showcase these personal stories.
It makes fluency feel more achievable and relatable.
Like, if they can do it, so can I.
Exactly. And it highlights the transformative power of language learning.
And the incredible doors it can open. But what really impressed me was their emphasis on community.
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask about that. They have a Facebook group for listeners, right? What's the vibe like there?
It's amazing. It's like an extension of the podcast, where learners can connect with each other, ask questions, share tips, participate in challenges, and even find language exchange partners.
It sounds like a really supportive and encouraging environment.
It is, and that sense of community can be so valuable for those who might be learning English on their own.
And feeling isolated or discouraged.
It's like having a tribe of fellow language enthusiasts cheering you on.
And celebrating your victories with you.
Yeah.
And celebrating your victories with you. It really reinforces that message that you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together.
Exactly. And that's what makes this podcast so special.
It really emphasizes that sense of shared purpose and reminds us that learning a language is a social endeavor.
It's about connecting with others, sharing experiences, and building relationships.
And Master English Fluency has created this incredible platform where those connections can flourish.
Both within the podcast itself and in their online community.
They've managed to strike that perfect balance between providing practical advice, inspiring learners, and fostering a sense of belonging.
And that's what makes their podcast so impactful. It's not just about learning the mechanics of English. It's about embracing the transformative potential of language learning.
And the incredible doors it can open.
What are some of the most surprising things you've learned about language learning from this deep dive?
Honestly, The research on the cognitive benefits of bilingualism really blew me away. I knew that learning another language could improve communication skills, but I had no idea it could actually enhance brain function and even protect against cognitive decline.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as learning a new language can have such profound effects on our minds.
And our overall well-being.
It's like a superpower disguised as a study habit. What I find particularly inspiring is how Master English Fluency has humanized the language learning process.
Right. They've taken something that can feel very academic and made it relatable, accessible, and even fun.
And they do it with a sense of humor and empathy.
That makes the journey feel less daunting and more like an adventure.
I love how they encourage learners to embrace mistakes.
And celebrate those small victories along the way,
It's a much more empowering approach than the traditional perfection or bust mentality.
which can be so discouraging.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And I think their emphasis on community is crucial. Learning a language can be a challenging and sometimes isolating experience.
So having a supportive network of fellow learners to share the journey with can make all the difference.
It creates that sense of shared purpose.
And reminds you that you're not alone on this path. We all stumble, we all celebrate, and we all grow together.
And that's what Master English Fluency has captured so beautifully.
They've created a movement, not just a podcast. They're inspiring a new generation of English learners
To embrace the power of language
to connect with the world in new ways.
and to unlock their full potential. And I think their final message, that question about how mastering another language changes how you think in your native tongue.
Really encapsulates the transformative nature of this journey. It's not just about acquiring new words and grammar rules.
It's about expanding our minds
challenging our perspectives.
and discovering new ways of seeing the world.
It's about embracing the interconnectedness of language and thought.
And realizing that fluency is not just a destination, but a gateway to a whole new world of possibilities. And as you continue on your English fluency journey, listener, keep exploring those possibilities. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and never stop asking questions, because the more you delve into the world of language, the more you'll discover about yourself and the incredible capacity of the human mind to connect, create, and evolve.
Beautifully said. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Master English Fluency.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have, and we can't wait to see where your fluency journey takes you next.